Hello everyone, and thank you again for joining me in Cyber Llama Talk. We already discovered a lot of different aspects of malware evolution in the period of 2005-2010, and we identified multiple what I call malware pillars, the foundational technology which caused such a quick evolution of malware in this period of time and such a success in malware development. We already identified server-side polymorphism as the first one, exploit kits as the second one, rootkits as the third one, and today we're going to talk about the last one, at least last for this time period, which is not surprisingly botnets. Between 2000 and 2010, there was truly a botnet time. Not only most of the money making and business based on malware was built on the concept of botnets, but also there was a lot of exploration in this area. The botnet can be drawn very simply. Those are all the victim machines. Bots could be zombie machines, bots, there are a lot of names on it, right? And usually what we have is the command and control server, and after the bots, the machines get infected, they report to command and control server and ask for commands, right? That's a very, very simple concept, and the very, very early botnets, the first botnets, look like that. However, of course, they didn't last long and they were not very successful, and the biggest reason of it is that they have a very big vulnerability in them. If anyone either shut down or take over or sinkhole or whatever the C2, the whole botnet is dead, right? The bots lose control, they're not controlled by anything, and they're pretty much useless waste of CPU on infected machines. That's why there was some experimentation of how botnet should look like and how the botnet looks like. And another big weakness of that, if the attacker operates this directly, meaning attacker somewhere here, and attacker connects to the C2 directly to issue commands, right? Command and control. If this C2 is taken over by law enforcement or security researchers, they can easily search back. So if the security researcher or law enforcement would take it over, they would immediately identify where was it controlled, right? Also the ISP providers can just give the records to law enforcement about who had access to that C2 in the investigation. So this form of botnet was very, very weak originally, right? It's a kind of first attempt. And so it evolved. So the first evolution of botnet was, of course, to separate the attacker, the real C2, and the bots, right, the infected machines. And that's why attackers came up with another layer, which actually just usually called layer C2. If you're doing red team operations, you probably nowadays hear about it as a redirector, right? So what happens is those are burnable servers, right? So it's a C2, but I guess it's a layer C2 or redirector, and there may be multiple of them, right? They're burnable. As soon as they shut down, the bot can try to connect another one and another one, right? And those lists can be updated on a regular basis, so this layer of C2 can be rotated and can be changed, and it's much more flexible, right? Then there is a real C2, which communicates with this layer, and then attacker communicates with that real C2. So imagine someone investigates the infection from here, and they collected a list of IP addresses in different countries. Even if, let's say, it's a law enforcement, and they had access to a few of those machines, right? First of all, even if they shut them down, the botnet can still function. And even if they try to track who was connecting to this layer, they're going to point to the C2, not to attacker's IP address, right? So it's yet another layer of separation. And of course, the bot masters were experimenting with that, right? It's not necessarily you need just one layer, you can have multiple layers of the C2, you can stack them together, you can actually, another option would be to actually grow smaller botnets. So let's say every day when they generate a new campaign with a new infections, they can change this layered C2, so every new wave of the bots, they would connect to different intermediate C2s, and then those connect to the main controller, right, the main command and control. That also, such architecture allow botnet masters to actually rent parts of the botnet to other people temporarily, and scale it up, right? So if you have 20,000 bots, you can rent 1,000 to one person, 5,000 to another person, and so on. It's also much more flexible. If a couple of your layer C2 redirectors get shut down, you can still pretty much try to update the lists and try to get back control to your bots. So that was kind of first invention of that time in the botnet development, is to make it layered C2 redirector rather than a direct connection. Another invention of that time are peer-to-peer botnets. Of course, peer-to-peer protocol was invented before the botnets, but at that period of time, the peer-to-peer botnets became very, very popular schema of how to make a botnet that's very resilient, at the same time very hard to track down the actual C2 in an attacker. So in the peer-to-peer schema, the victim machines would connect to each other, right, peer-to-peer. But of course, it's not actually always possible. And I start drawing and then I realize I'm making it wrong, right? So all of those infected machines, victims, zombies, not all the machines accessible from the internet, right? A lot of them are behind NAT, and you cannot just directly access and connect to them. So naturally, any peer-to-peer botnet would consist of the nodes which do have access to internet and the ones which behind the NAT. And usually, what would happen is that the worker nodes, the ones which are behind the NAT, they able to perform and execute commands, but they're not able to talk to each other directly because they cannot be accessed from the internet. So instead, they would connect to a relay node or to proxy node, whatever it's called. And those proxy nodes are the ones which are accessible from the internet, and then they can exchange the list of other nodes they are aware about. So as a result, at any period of time, each node knows about another n node, let's say another 100 nodes, which are available for that node to connect and get instructions. Specifically, every worker node, the one which cannot be connected directly from internet, right? It reaches out to the proxy node or the relay and asks for the commands and also asks for list update, right? So it's said on a regular basis, it says, hey, I'm connecting to you, I'm giving you my list, you give me your list, so we can shuffle it. And so on every interaction, or like every day, we can update each other's lists. So these lists of nodes are constantly dynamic. And because of the nature of this dynamic exchange of the lists, so let's say this node has 500 other knows about 500 other nodes, this one has 500, this one has 500, this has 500, right? And they try to connect to the first node they know, and they connect and say, hey, take my half, let's say 250, and give me your half, 250. So on every connection, the list is reshuffled, right? And those nodes which are accessible from internet, of course, they can connect to, let's say, a layered C2, or actually pretty much those nodes behind the net also can connect to layer C2 if they want. So fundamentally, this redirector node's not even needed because C2 can just be a part of the botnet, right? Because there's no actual difference in the structure. Like pretty much that can be under attacker controls, or it can be infected machine. It still gives the command and the rest of the botnet and exchange the rest of the list, right? So you just need to have a couple of your own nodes accessible on the internet to push your lists and your commands, and these commands are going to be distributed among the botnet. So this structure, kind of mixed structure between peer-to-peer and layers and a different type of different type of nodes. That ended up being very successful because it's very resilient to take down. If you sinkhole of any of these IP addresses, you're just going to get a new 250, and if it cannot connect to one, or it can just connect to a random IP address out of this 250, and it updated on a daily basis. So to take down such a botnet, it takes much more coordinated effort, and it's much harder than taking down, let's say, just a layer and just cutting out completely the C2. It also hides an attacker very well behind the whole C2, right? Because there are so many layers, an attacker can simply own a few of these nodes and connect to them, and it's very hard in a big botnet to learn which one of that is actual C2 and which one of them are just infected machines. So in period of 2005 to 2010, this architecture was probably the most successful ones, though it was very sophisticated, so most of the botnets were not constructed in such a sophisticated way, but this one though was the most resilient to take down. Okay, so to conclude, we discussed with you that the period of 2005-2010 was explosive and innovative period of botnet development, and there were simple, just C2 botnets. Then it evolved to, let's call it redirector, being fancy and modern, or another layer. C2, then we have multiple layers to protect the main control, and then we had peer-to-peer botnets, and we also had the hybrid. The hybrid one would combine a peer-to-peer and a layered C2 to maximize the resilience and also OPSEC of the attacker and the botnet master. So that was the last, in my opinion, the fourth pillar of malware evolution and development in that period. Now it's a good time to actually discuss how anti-malware evolved to battle against those four pillars. So looking forward to see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening and staying with me. See you next one.